Meter Eaters. On this week's episode of the Fantasy Rucker Show, we are talking the best fantasy MLR centers from the 2023 season. We also keep you up to date with all the latest roster moves happening in a busy Major League Rugby offseason, and of course, discuss a little bit about the Rugby World Cup finale happening this week. The Fantasy Rucker Show starts right now.
Where rugby and the world of fantasy sports collide. Welcome to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, talking all things rugby from the MLR to leagues around the world. We're on top of it. Headphones on, pads off. This is the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Yee, Matt Yee, and Devin Vanderpool.
What's up, everybody? This is episode number 83 of the Fantasy Ruckers Show. Thank you so much to our Fantasy Ruckers League members, our community members, and everyone else tagging along on this journey of trying to make fantasy rugby a reality in the MLR. I'm Ryan Yee. With me, as always, Matt Yee. And Matt, on this episode, we continue our top fantasy player ranking reveal from the 2023 season. We took a little bit of a pause there. A big position in this one. Got centers coming up on this episode 83.
We should be excited, and the people should be excited. Ryan, I'm not excited. I'm not excited to find out how bad our rankings were.
Yeah,
I'm honestly just looking forward. I think I'm going to be good for next. I think I'm going to be I've done so much learning from this year's rankings. Also knowing that we're going to be held accountable at the end of the year. I got to do better next year, and I've got plans for that.
Yeah, there you go. When we were comparing it to our predictions that we had at the start of the 2023 season, that's what we're talking about. A little bit rough there, but it is a nice little workshop here going through the rankings and seeing a full season play through. And it's all about learning here on the Fantasy Rucker Show. So we're moving forward here, learning for us, learning for the listeners, learning for everyone who wants to get involved in fantasy MLR. But yeah, on this one, we got a jam-packed episode, Maddie. We got a whole bunch of news and notes. It doesn't stop. It's since about 2 or 3 weeks ago when we had that MLR news flash. I mean, it with these signings, these trades, there is no shortage of roster moves being had on a weekly basis. It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, and it's apparently, I mean, there's rumors left and right? There's things that are being announced, Ryan, and we got to try and weed through those, right, from our reliable sources. And we also got to weed through all the rumors that are coming in, which are just stating even more signings are to come, which just means that we're going to have another hectic couple of months of this silly season. So it's going to be exciting, and honestly, it gives us just more to talk about here.
And of course, Rugby World Cup coming to the climax here with the finally set. So we're going to talk a little bit about that this coming week, which should be exciting. And then again, we mentioned at the top of the episode about how our goal here is to make fantasy rugby or fantasy MLR reality for all the masses. And you and I, Matt, had a little sneak peek of the website that we've been teasing all this offseason so far. Obviously, we had the grand launch of our initial website this past year, but we're constantly trying to make it better. We're trying to make a platform that is open for everyone to use. You and I have got to see a little bit of a sneak peek on what it's going to look like for the people out there. Had a little meeting with the mastermind behind the website, Alistair Kirschpool. Gotta say, it looks pretty good.
Well, you know what? I'm going to say the original launch, that's what we call the bones, right? That's what we call the bones of the fantasy MLR. And now we're really putting together that good looking body around the bones. It's looking muscular. It's looking handsome. It's looking jacked. I'm excited for this upcoming season strictly because of the way that the website can look and the upgrades that we're going to get from our boy, Alistair Kirschpool. So that's all I can say. That's all I can say from here on out.
Yeah, so if you haven't checked out our original website yet, go check that out, thefantasyruckers.com. Big changes coming, though. It's going to look completely different. And again, the goal here is to have that website be able to be used as a platform for many more people. Obviously, we have had our kind of our flagship league, our test league ongoing, our guinea pigs going forward here.
Rats.
But the lab rats. But we have the goal of opening this up to a whole bunch more people, and that's what this website is going to do. So check out what it's come from, and obviously we'll keep you guys posted with how this new website is coming along. But like we said, we've seen it in person now, and it's getting closer and closer to looking like the real deal. And again, just like how we say every single episode, if you aren't already and you want to be first in the know when fantasy MLR is opened up to the masses, make sure you're giving us a follow at the Fantasy Ruckers on X, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. You want to be checking out all there because that's where we'll keep you in the know when it comes to all things fantasy MLR. And then, of course, we do have a Discord channel as well, linked down below in the description for if all that content isn't enough for you. Got a nice little community there that includes our current league members, that will include all the additional people that will be joining Fantasy MLR. Should be a little fun little community that we'll have growing here over the next couple months, couple years, and have ourselves a little Fantasy Ruckers following here as we keep on trudging through of making Fantasy MLR reality.
Yep, and you're going to want to be on board of that, that's for sure. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. Ryan, I'm just excited. You know,
it's
the more off-season stuff that we talk about, the more website stuff that we talk about, the closer we get to the season, it's just getting me more and more excited.
It's true. All right, well, let's get into it. Let's talk about a little Rugby World Cup first, Maddie, because obviously that's the big thing on the table here. Got 2 semifinals over the past weekend. I gotta say the quarterfinal round felt more like the semifinal than the semifinal felt like the semifinal, if that makes any sense.
No, definitely.
You know,
yeah.
we had a matchup, a pretty lopsided one between New Zealand and Argentina, and then we had ourselves a interesting one, to say the least, between England and South Africa.
That's a word for it. Let's give a quick synopsis of each one. Argentina started off hot. New Zealand kind of showed their class, and Argentina just couldn't keep up. The South Africa-England game sucked. That's all I have to say. That was it. Ryan, you're right. Semifinals felt like, or the quarterfinals felt like semifinals here for almost all the games, really. And then, South Africa and England put up that stinker of a game. Even though it was close, it was a stinker of a game. And Argentina, New Zealand, I mean, New Zealand just couldn't, or Argentina just couldn't keep up. But yeah, South Africa and New Zealand meet each other once again, just like they did in 2015. 2019.
And, I mean, it's pretty, no, 2015. 2019 was England, South Africa. So this is now, I guess, South Africa's 3rd consecutive appearance in a World Cup final, which is pretty crazy to think about.
And New Zealand looking for their 4th World Cup win, first ever country to do that. Sam Whitelock on New Zealand looking for his 3rd World Cup win, which is crazy because he would be, I think, the first men's player to ever win 3 World Cups in international career. So yeah, it'll be an exciting game for sure.
It's pretty crazy there. I think I know, based on the jersey that you're wearing, who you got in this final. I mean, they've looked like the best team in these knockout stages. If I had to put my money where my mouth is, I'd probably say the same. But it looks like the All Blacks will be coming back home with that 4th World Cup.
Well, don't jinx it here, but yeah, I will be cheering for them. They're familiar faces, so it'll be one hell of a match. That's for sure.
Yeah, so it should be interesting. Again, that final taking place on, I believe, October 28th, this coming Saturday. So you'll be wanting to tune into that. It's a nice little precipice of the past, a month and a half of rugby that's been going on, essentially. It's been a lot of fun, and we'll get to see who hoists the Webb Ellis Cup here towards the tail end of this week, which is going to be exciting stuff. Anything last thing to say about the World Cup?
Nothing more for me. We'll have something fun to, I guess, say next episode, and either I'll be happy or I'll be disappointed.
You still dying on the hill that Southern Hemisphere rugby is still taking over here now that with that showing with England?
Look where we are. It's the finals, and South Africa has been there the past 3 years. New Zealand has been there the past 2 out of 3 years. I don't know what to tell you. I mean, you look at all the World Cup winners. South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and England is the only Northern Hemisphere team that's won one. So it is what it is. Just speaking facts here.
Yeah, speaking facts. All right. Well, speaking of England, the Premiership is currently ongoing, heading into its 3rd week after just wrapped up its 2nd round. And we talked about it last episode, how we were dabbling in other means of fantasy rugby. And it looks like, Matt, that we're doing not too bad. We know that we're the experts when it comes to MLR. And it's all about, like we said, it's all about learning. It's all about making improvements. The first round finished in the top 50% of the entire world when it came to to our lineup in fantasy Premiership rugby.
Yeah.
Look at us now, top 30% up. We jumped ahead 3,500 fools,
Yeah.
and now we're above. Now we're in the top 30th percentile in the world when it comes to fantasy Premiership. I think we're looking pretty good. By the end of the year, we might be the best team out there.
I'm looking for that 90th percentile by the end of the year, right? But I just gotta say this is that the guts and I got to admit the bravery of our friend, our friend Slow and Steady,
Steven.
Steven, yes. The bravery of him to suggest this great idea for us to join a fantasy Ruckers Super Brew League team just so he can get his butt whooped again.
No
Crazy.
kidding.
Just absolute bravery, and I can only commend him for that.
Well, you know what? He didn't get enough of it during our fantasy MLR season when he was in the bottom half of our league. Now, I will say the fantasy MLR season was a rough one for him. Maybe he wanted a shot and then a crack at maybe one-upping the fantasy Ruckers here in the offseason. But hey, top 30th percentile in, we're looking pretty good. So whether it's fantasy MLR, fantasy Premiership, bring it on. I think we are the fantasy experts here on the Fantasy Ruckers show. I'm saying it right here, right now.
We'll see, but hey,
maybe not by the end of the episode with the way our predictions went.
What I will say that is a bit more factual is that even though we got this Super Brew Fantasy Rugby, this is not hankering my fantasy MLR fix. I need the season back, and as we get into these signings, it's just going to get me more excited.
And again, we talked about it last episode. There's a huge difference between the way that fantasy rugby historically has been played in terms of the salary cap way, and you pick up a lineup. The way that we've been doing it, the new novel way of turning fantasy rugby, fantasy MLR into this North American-esque, draft-esque fantasy style. It's a completely different game, and I think I agree with you, Matt. Obviously, no bias involved there, but it's just there's a whole different element to it, and it's just with fantasy football going on full swing. I know you and I are fully in that right now. It's definitely a different beast, and it definitely keeps your eyes glued to the screen for better or for worse. And if you're a fantasy manager out there of any sport who plays this style of fantasy sport draft style, I think you know what I mean. But yeah, like you mentioned, Matt, a whole bunch of signings and trades happening that is going to affect this upcoming 2024 fantasy MLR season. So let's get into the news and notes portion of the episode 83 here and talk about some signings and trades. And again, I think the best way to go about it is to go team by team, just because there's so many of them that are making some of these moves. I guess before we get into each individual team, Matt, just is it surprising to you? Is it exciting for you to see this amount of movement? Because for me, I don't remember an off season this busy in the history of the MLR, at least since we've been following. It's absolutely nuts.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things that are probably playing a factor. One, the whole Atlanta moving to LA. They're obviously doing some crazy things by just getting rid of every good player that they've had so they can go to LA and suck. And then also, I think it seems like there's just it's almost like there's just a lot of contracts that were ending this year, which obviously we didn't know about because who would want to give people the visibility on that? But there's just been a lot of re-signing this year, I think. And that's kind of added to noise. But yeah, definitely getting me excited. And honestly, I feel like there's so much more to come.
All right. Well, let's start breaking in. We've got no time to waste here. Let's start with the Chicago Hounds, who have been a pretty busy team this offseason, and that continues this week. A few big signings this past week that is definitely fantasy relevant. We'll start with the re-signing of Julian Dominguez, who is now returning to the Hounds, a player that has been a staple for the MLR when it comes to try scoring. 23 tries scored across 44 caps that he started in. He led the Hounds in their first season with 6 tries. Julian Dominguez returns to the Hounds, and he's a guy that has been fantasy relevant last year. He's been fantasy relevant before when he was on the Gilgronis. 137.5 fantasy points in the 12 matches he started in this past season. A season high 25.6 points in round 17. It would have got you a championship there, and it would have been a huge contribution to that final. A little bit of a volatile player, but that's what you expect with a back three guy. But Julian Dominguez, he's one of those solid back three players for fantasy MLR.
Yeah, I mean, he's a beast. He was a must-have, and I think a pretty high draft pick as well. I think it was unfortunate. He probably had some injury troubles throughout the year, but when he was on the field, 90% of the time, you can count on him to get double-digit points. But yeah.
Yeah. Another guy that the Chicago Hounds are bringing back is this is a big one. Billy Meeks is returning to the Chicago Hounds. 2021, 2022 back of the year. Again, obviously high expectation for this player heading in to this season, especially in the fantasy season. But obviously with some of those work permit things that were going on, he kind of dropped in our fantasy draft that happened a little bit. But over the course of the season, and with this being a center episode, obviously Billy Meeks is a guy that we're going to be talking about. So I'm not going to reveal too much from his fantasy season, but I mean, 41 MLR claps, 14 with the Chicago Hounds this past season, over 1,100 meters gained this past season, which obviously is going to be a big contributing factor of where he appears. I'll spoil it now. He's in the top 5, depends where he's in there. But Billy Meeks, he's a guy that if he had played the full year, he probably was going to be one of your top fantasy guys, even already being one of the top fantasy guys, even having missed a couple games.
Yeah, barring any visa issues, hopefully that's all figured out. He will be one of the top centers coming into next season. And at the end of next season, he's what we call the OG meter eater. And he's been that way ever since he's joined the league.
Yeah, absolutely. Another signing for the Chicago Hounds, Bryce Campbell, returning captain for the Chicago Hounds, returning for the 2024 season. It's 52 MLR caps, a vet of the league, scoring 7 tries since 2018. Appeared all 16 games last season for the Hounds. I mean, Campbell was a guy that was a little bit off and on for fantasy rugby, kind of. A lot of the fantasy production at least went through Billy Meeks, but Bryce Campbell kind of finding his footing. Not really any explosive games, but a pretty solid player for you that you could rely on a weekend basis to at least get you some points.
Yeah, I mean, he was definitely a guy that you had on your roster. He was no player that you could start every week just because of the presence of Billy Meeks, and it was hard to really have teams that had 2 centers that were fantasy producing. But it'll be big fantasy wise just because he was such an impactful player, both fantasy wise and not fantasy wise. So yeah, it's great to see him back on the Hounds.
Yeah, and the Hounds also signing Georgian prop Zurabi Zavania, so it should be interesting to see what he does.
We love our Georgian boys, Ryan. We
They're
love the boys. Love to see more of them in the MLR. We don't see enough, if you ask me. So love to see that this signing. But hey, quick comment on the Chicago Hounds. It looks like they're re-signing all their players just to suck again. So, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Fighting words to come out, huh? That's what you're just going to say. We just
that's it. Let's move on to the next team.
No, we can't just move on.
What do you mean?
We
got the polar opposite coming up next.
What are you talking about? We spent the 5 minutes of talking about 3 fantasy relevant guys.
That doesn't mean the team's going to be good. It means the Chicago Hounds are still going to suck. They got the same team as last year. Every other team's gotten better. So, I mean, great. You got Jackie Moon, all right? You're playing like the Flint Tropics. Like, they're not going to save your season. I'm sorry.
They scarred you, huh? With the predictions that we put into the Chicago Hounds at the start of the 2023 with the high expectations. They hurt you. They hurt you deeply.
Oh, man. Ryan, they did not hurt me. They hurt you way deeper. All right. Your emotional or you're predicting had them, their team was just over the moon. And I'm sorry to say, but they're bringing back the same players just to do the exact same thing they did last year. Moving on.
I guess we'll see. All right. Yeah. Moving on to now the San Diego Legion, who also stayed pretty busy. Signing a couple of young guys. U20 Wallabies prop Darcy Breen going to the Legion. U20 US Lock, who I believe had some appearances with Cardiff overseas, if I'm correct. Brandon Harvey is signing with the Legion. But the 2 big ones that we got to talk about, Christian Poitevin re-signing with the Legion, and Thomas Awake signing a 3-year deal. You talked about how much you like seeing that there's a little bit of transparency here with the length of these contracts. It looks like we're getting that with Thomas Awake. But let's start with Poitevin here, a guy that obviously in the middle part of the season was dealing with, I believe, injury stuff. But when he came on, he was fantasy relevant. I mean, from weeks when he had that spurt between rounds 5, 7, 8. I mean, double-digit fantasy performances. When he was on the field, he did it all. And then talk about what that run that he was able to have in our fantasy playoffs. 20.6 in round 16 in our semifinal fantasy playoffs, and then 16.9 points in round 17 to cap off the year. Poitevin is going to be a guy that people are going to be hunting. Despite maybe that point total being a little bit low because of that injury, I think people are not going to be hesitant to draft Poitevin here, especially hearing now that he's returning with the Legion.
Yeah, and I mean, we touched on this last episode a little bit. We brought up these guys, but I mean, they're so good that we kind of have to talk about it again, right? We got to make sure that we hammer home the fact that San Diego is bringing back two guys that are crucial to their kind of their defense of the championship, defense of the shield. And Poitevin is one of those guys that was just absolutely ridiculous around the breakdown. Found himself in space a lot of the times to get those meters gained. So fantasy wise, when he was on, he was on, and I loved having him on my squad. That's for sure.
Yeah, 5 tries on the season in the 12 matches that he played for the Legion, coming off of a year where he won the championship with the Giltinis, scoring 9 tries in that. Over the course of his career, 40 caps, 9 tries so far in his career. Yeah, this is a guy that's going to be absolutely electric here, especially for fantasy MLR moving forward. But let's talk about another guy who's going to be absolutely electric, Thomas Awake. He's a guy that a lot of people had eyes on, especially with regards to fantasy MLR. Guy had the try scoring ability, 25 MLR caps since 2022, 15 tries in total, scored 11 tries in 15 games in 2023. Awake was just a guy that was explosive. 186.6 fantasy points on the year. Went through a stretch between rounds 3 to 11, double-digit fantasy point performances, and then to cap off the year, round 15, 16, 17, 20.5 points, 24.2 points, 21 points. This is a guy that's again kind of same notion with Poitevin. You're going to be hunting this guy for your 2024 rosters.
Yeah, and I mean people didn't know because his first half year in the MLR, it was okay, right? It wasn't crazy, but last year is really where he came into form. And he was huge for the San Diego Legion. He was kind of a must start in both fantasy wise and for the Legion on the field, because he was just a try scoring machine. And we love that for fantasy, and San Diego Legion loves that for their wins.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So yeah, San Diego returning 2 of their big contributors, 2 big fantasy contributors here, which is going to be huge. Again, we know how explosive that offense is, and how explosive that team is when it comes to scoring tries, and those 2 guys are going to be a big part of it. So I'm excited. I'm excited that
and I mean, while these are huge signings, I mean, we got to talk about a little bit just about those 2 younger guys signing, right? You bring in some young talent, especially from like the Wallabies U20. We know that that's a good side. And then also a U.S. eligible lock. And when a U.S. eligible lock is playing overseas, especially in kind of the Bucks competition, the university competition in Wales, it's always a good sign. And it seems like they're not just stacking up star-studded talent, but they're also developing kind of things for the future of guys that are going to have an impact on their team for this season and in the future.
Absolutely. All right, let's shift on to our next team here. Not as heavily fantasy relevant signings here, but we got the Dallas Jackals making some moves. South African Marcel Muller, the winger from South Africa, is joining. He joins from Cheetahs Rugby, playing in the Currie Cup competition. Scored a try and earned 2 caps with Houston Sabercats in 2022. So this is a guy that has some overseas experience, has MLR experience. We'll see what Marcel Muller is able to do. And then they're bringing back lock Lucas Burr, who is somewhat fantasy relevant. I mean, 90.6 fantasy points at the lock position is pretty solid, averaging around that 6-point mark. He started almost every single, or played in almost every single match this past season for the Dallas Jackals, starting in all of them. Lucas Burr, I mean, he's a guy that you could probably be relying on for fantasy if you wanted to just punt that lock position. He's a guy that you can slot in there and be confident that he's not going to goose egg you on a week. Lucas Burr coming back with the Dallas Jackals and should see that same production alongside Sam Galla there this 2024 year.
Yeah, he was definitely a streaming option, that's for sure. I think his only downside was the fact that he was on the Dallas Jackals, which made everybody kind of hesitant to pick him up. But yeah, he'll definitely have some relevance this upcoming season, coming injuries, coming bye weeks. He's definitely a guy that'll find his way on and off rosters throughout the year.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's shift on to the next team now. Keep on rolling through these signings and trades. Got to talk about Old Glory DC, who has made some big-time moves here. Thomas E. Boney is coming to Old Glory DC. He's USA Rugby capped, departs Zebra Parma. Now he's joining Old Glory DC. He has had tests, was selected, in the U.S. squad for their November tests in Spain. So Thomas O, has experience, and we'll see what he's able to do for Old Glory DC.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we keep a close eye on these overseas guys, especially these U.S. eligible guys, right? Because they're they're kind of the prime. They're the prime guys that the MLR is trying to bring back. So it's good to see OGDC being able to bring back a U.S. eligible player, and it'll be exciting to see what kind of impact he has in fantasy wise.
Big one here. Jack Iscaro is returning to the Old Glory DC. Pretty fantasy relevant prop. Started in 13 of the 15 matches he played in from the fantasy season. 71.5 fantasy points on the season. Again, one of those streamer guys that you could put in a pinch to get you some points and maybe hope that he is able to break off for some meters gained. No tries this past season, but nonetheless was still somewhat fantasy relevant at that prop position. Pretty good tackle numbers there. So he gave you that baseline.
Yeah, I mean, he's kissed with fire. So, I mean, you can expect the world out of him.
Yeah, it's DC's second most capped player, which is crazy. 45 caps, 43 starts since 2021, scoring 3 tries in that time. So Iscaro, obviously a staple of that OGDC side. And then finally for Old Glory DC, they're bringing in English winger Perry Humphreys to join Old Glory DC. Again, just one of these guys to keep an eye on, international signing who could have some impact depending on where he slots in the lineup, of course, to see what playing time he gets.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at the OGDC kind of winger group. And they did have some decent players on that wing. But I think for me, I mean, you look at this is going to be a great addition for them. And he could potentially be a really big pickup and be really fantasy relevant wise for them.
Absolutely. All right. And then now shifting over to this LA squad that has yet to be named yet. And we kept on talking. About how this team has been dishing out players and has been dishing out all for salary cap considerations. But hey, look, they're making moves to bring a guy in. So it looks like they dished out all those salary cap considerations.
Yeah, so this is what they're saving up for?
To bring in Regan O'Gorman, who from a fantasy perspective was not that relevant. Only started in 5 matches, played in 8 last season. But hey, Regan O'Gorman is now an LA player, and I guess he was one of the guys that they needed to save the salary cap for.
So they saved up the salary cap for this, right? For this pickup. Mm-hmm. They also gave away a 2nd round pick,
right?
For Regan O'Gorman. So there's a couple theories I have. One, they have no idea. They're just about as good at valuing players and trades as we are, because I mean. Salary cap and a 2nd round pick. Again, we also don't know what the picks are valued because people are just giving them away like it's nothing. But yeah, Regan O'Gorman, I mean, you're giving up salary cap for a guy who started 5 games last year. I don't know what to say about this. I have this feeling. I don't know what's happened with this LA team, Ryan. I can't explain it. I don't know what players they have left. Is it just Regan O'Gorman? I don't know who's left on this squad because all of them have left for salary cap considerations. And then now they've given all the salary cap considerations away for Regan O'Gorman. So I have no clue. Do they even have a Twitter?
That's why. Well, I don't even know what the name of the team is, and that's why
nobody knows.
Make the joke here. I think they're going to be called the Los Angeles Moneybags Regan O'Gorman.
Well, yeah. I mean, it'll just be him. It'll just be him on the field. That's
got money and Regan O'Gorman. That's about it. I don't know anyone else that they have left.
Oh my gosh! Squad. I mean, I guess whoever's left of that rattle squad that was taken apart immediately after it was announced.
It's not many. It's not many. That's for sure. All right, shifting over to the Houston SaberCats. Line Latu is returning to the Houston SaberCats fullback. He played for the SaberCats in the eliminator game in 2023, but he was over down in the South playing for the Super Rugby Americas with the American Raptors. So Line Latu is a guy that you'll keep an eye on. We'll see where he kind of slots in that SaberCats lineup. Should be all right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we saw him that much in the playoffs when he signed on, but he probably just got tired of losing with the Glendale Raptors and decided that he wanted to come play some winning rugby.
All right, Toronto doing Toronto things, re-signing their guys.
I don't know. Right. I have no clue. I don't understand. I really don't. There has to be something coming in the pipeline, but announce it so I can so people know what I'm reacting.
Right. Toronto re-signs Will Grant, scrum half, with the Arrows. Will Grant is a guy, again, kind of in the shadow who am I thinking of here?
Brody.
Of Brody. But he did have appearances there. Obviously, with the injury of Brody that happened, I believe in some of the games, Will Grant had to step up. Again, not crazy fantasy relevant, but he
Nope.
is returning with the Arrows, and then Mason Flesh is also returning to the Arrows. So once again, just the same. You talk about same Chicago Hound squad. It's essentially the same
Well,
Arrow squad
you
coming back
know,
plus the 2 additions, I
at
guess.
least with the Arrows, they got Povey, they got Tarangatira Waitokia, they got Rewood Biddle.
Yeah.
You know, you can feel good about those are 3 star-studded guys.
Yeah.
But they
Wha-
continue on this trend of announcing and sticking with the same pathway of getting these Canadian eligible development guys and acting like a development team for the Canada squad. And it's just not working. Yes, that is actually, it's not even good for Canadian rugby because they still suck too. So, you're sucking in the MLR, the Canadian team sucking. At least pick one to be good at. And I would love for it to be the MLR.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, I guess we don't need to talk about much then. Again,
No.
same, just re-signing things. Move on to Utah. I think this is one of the bigger signings here.
Yes.
Nick Suchon
Yes.
is going to the Utah Warriors. I think this is a huge low-key kind of signing. Nick Suchon was a very fantasy relevant guy. Played at that the hooker position for Old Glory DC. Starting in 14 of the 15 matches he appeared in the fantasy season. Had fantasy relevant games, plenty of double-digit try-scoring matches, 7 tries this past season, and now he joins a Utah Warrior side that should be very, very solid when it comes to the 2024 MLR season. This kind of coincides with the retiring of Henry Bell
Yeah.
with the Utah Warriors, which I think that's what coincides. But Nick Suchon, he's a more than adequate replacement to get into that starting lineup for the Utah Warriors.
By the way, incredibly surprising. Henry Bell, young guy, came from MPC. But I think if you're going to replace Henry Bell with anybody with the season that or half season that he really had last year, Nick Suchon is the guy. I'm pretty sure they both actually came from Bay of Plenty, which is crazy. So they just racking up guys from Bay of Plenty. But Nick Suchon is the exact same player prototype for me, right? Henry Bell was a guy who could play over 60 minutes if you needed him to.
Mm-hmm.
He was a tackle machine. He was also kind of lethal at the breakdown. And yeah, you could kind of rely on him for some tries, but it was mainly the tackles. And Nick Suchon has kind of had that same idea of, hey, I'm going to rack up tackles for you. I can play over 60 minutes if you need me to. Except Nick Suchon on top of that is also a bit of a try scoring machine for that. Was a try scoring machine for that OGDC squad and definitely had his opportunity. So I think this is a great replacement for Utah. It'll be interesting to see how they balance him and Vugakato in that squad if he's coming back. But to me, I think this doesn't affect Nick Suchon's value. He's still going to be one of the top hookers in the MLR.
I mean, when you have a front row player that is able to reach that 20 tackle ceiling, that's pretty nuts. I mean, 20 tackles in round 16, round 5 and round 1, 18 tackles, 10 tackles in round 4, 17 in round 14. He's an exciting player that you'll definitely want to keep an eye on when it comes to fantasy circles. And then a couple of not so fantasy relevant, but it's cool to see obviously guys moving through the pathway program for some of these squads. But to Takaji Young Yen and Jesse Hamilton both returning to the Utah Warriors, who made it through. They had a couple appearances last season, but made it through their Utah Warriors pathway program. Shift on over to the NOLA Gold. This one's a pretty big one. Malcolm May. He's returning to NOLA, front row guy. He's been kind of a staple of that squad. Was definitely fantasy relevant. 98.3 fantasy points from that front row position. Had a few double-digit scoring opportunities. Back row player for the NOLA Gold. I mean, Malcolm May, one of those staple guys with the NOLA Gold, returns to New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, when he was starting, he was an explosive player, and you definitely felt tempted to stream him. I think he found his way kind of on and off rosters last year.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a guy that if you were in a bind and you needed to pick up, he was a guy that could provide you with some pretty big upside. And yeah, it's exciting to see him back with NOLA.
Yeah, 40 MLR caps since 2019, 25 of them with starts, all with the NOLA Gold. I mean, again, tackler, 135 tackles in 16 games in 2023. So he's a guy, again, will provide you that baseline and has that ability to reach those double-digit tackle numbers, which always gives you that solid base to work off with. Between round 5 and round 10, had double-digit tackles in every single one of those matches. So Malcolm May, definitely a solid one for you. And then just shifting over to some kind of other news and note stuff. We mentioned it. Henry Bell is retiring, but also Cliven Lobser is retiring too,
Oh,
which
I
is kind
mean,
of a big one there.
yeah, I
He's
mean,
a
it
guy that
makes
was
sense
definitely
though.
fantasy relevant.
Yeah, it definitely it makes sense though when you look at it. I think he just came off uh kind of that Rugby World Cup run with Namibia. So you know, you do the Rugby World Cup cycle, you make it to the Namibian squad, and then you say, yeah, this is about it for me. But yeah, what an MLR career he had. He was definitely a staple that when he was playing,
Right.
because I know he didn't play a full season last year. When he was playing, he was definitely a guy that you wanted on your squad.
Yeah. And then another retiring, this one's a big one. Danny Barrett, who's been
Oof.
a kind of a staple of the Houston SaberCats team. He's calling it and hanging up the boots as well. Not so fantasy relevant this past year, kind of
Yeah.
had trouble kind of staying on the field
Yep.
and being in that portion. But Danny Barrett definitely was one of those marquee name guys that, you're sad to see leave the game.
Yeah, and everybody remembers the old big boomfa he did in sevens for the USA Eagles. I think that was a big. It was either that or some sort of like basketball catch or something he did one-handed grab. Probably both, honestly. But what a legend! I mean, he leaves the game in a better place than he left it.
Absolutely. And then last thing I want to talk about, and this is kind of interesting before we start to shift over to these center rankings, is front office stuff. The New England Free Jacks, your 2023 MLR champion New England Free Jacks, has announced that they're returning 10 of the 11 coaches from the championship winning team. So again, if you're going to expect one team to kind of
Oh,
continue to be successful, the New England Free Jacks might be that team because
yeah.
that front office is staying put, and what they have
Oh my gosh,
operating up there is pretty good. So why
Ryan.
why fix it if it ain't broke?
I was just thinking that I said earlier in the show that San Diego Legion was defending their shield like an idiot, and I forgot that the New England Free Jacks came in there and stole it from them.
Yeah,
And you know what? No, I mean, I'll take that previous statement back. I can't believe I forgot. I remember because I thought that San Diego Legion was going to win the whole time, and then I found out the New England Free Jacks won. But
Quattro
yeah,
wouldn't be too happy with you, man.
no, it wouldn't be too bad. But hey, it wouldn't be the first time.
That's true.
But no, that's great to hear. I mean, look, consistency in the coaching staff is one of the great things that you can have as a team, and that's great to hear. A couple other actually front office stuff, right? That I know the Arrows are moving Corey Hector, who is a head coach of their development side, who Derek Brissett from LaRouge Rugby calls them the Top Guns. Pretty cool.
That's pretty cool.
And he's moving up in a coaching gig for the Arrows. They still haven't named their head coach after they fired their last coach, Peter Smith. And then Jamie Cudmore is moving as a head coach at their academy
That's cool
side.
to see.
It's cool to see. He had some questionable tweets a couple years ago. I don't know if, I think they're deleted
we don't
now.
Need to go there. We don't
need to go there right now. But yeah, that's some other front office stuff. Right. Before we get into the center stuff, I got a few things from my end that I got to get out.
Mm-hmm.
Based on the roster stuff, these are rumors only that I've seen tweets going by, but I'm, scouring the rumor mill. A couple things. Apparently, Nicholas Sanchez, who just lost to the All Blacks, is potentially joining Thomas Kubeli at the Sharks. I don't know. I saw a tweet out with that. We'll see.
Pretty
That could be very fantasy relevant and very insane, and also be a huge boost for that Miami Shark side.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing was that I think coming off of a rugby wrap up episode, or DJ Coyle, Doug Coyle, tweeted saying that he's expecting New York Ironworkers to announce some overseas signings, specifically New Zealand signings. And he was surprised that they weren't announced there. So I wonder if maybe there's something coming for this quiet Ironworkers side. Because Ryan, we were mentioning last episode, the Ironworkers, they've been very quiet in this offseason. They're one of the few teams that have been quiet who had a very disappointing year last year. So it'll be definitely interesting to see what type of overseas signing they can do. Because obviously they have a pretty heavy kind of Kiwi and New Zealand based squad over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it'll be interesting. It looks like the busy offseason is not going to stop. And Matt, I know you had a quick update too with the NPC Bunnies Cup as well.
Yeah, non-roster update, but definitely fantasy relevant. Taranaki Bulls, congratulations. More specifically, congratulations to the MLR players playing for the Taranaki Bulls on their MPC Bunnings Cup win. Tom Florence, Jason Potros, Tom Franklin, and I believe Veroneki Tika Solomone. All of them had good. Yeah, I got that one. All of them had pretty good shifts for them. I actually don't know if Tika Solomone got on, but yeah, congratulations to them.
Name again.
I just wanted to say it again, but congratulations to them. And I'm looking forward to seeing at least 3 out of the 4 guys. Tom Franklin, I'm not sure if he announced his re-signing yet. He's an older guy, but 3 out of the 4, I'm hoping we see back with the MLR and hoping to see play and have on my fantasy team.
All right. Well, all right. Let's get it. We teased it at the top of the show. That wraps it up for the news and notes. But let's start getting into continuing. I know it's been a little bit since we did, but let's continue our top fantasy.
We could stay away for a bit
reveal.
more. Eh?
No. Let's get right into it. Let's peel off the band-aids here. But this episode is all about the center position. We talked about the meter eaters, the guys that were really the basis of your fantasy production team. I think we learned that pretty quickly heading into the season, also during the season, that this center position, along with kind of the back row, was kind of the basis of where you were going to get a lot of your points, at least the basis of your points, with the tackles, with the meters gained, and the top 5. I don't want to say it was necessarily shocking, but there were some guys in there that had snuck into the top 5 that maybe we had not predicted. Let's throw it up right now. So top 5 players from the 2023 season of the centers. JP Duplessis, Matt, I know you're really familiar with him and was a marquee point of getting you that fantasy title this past year and getting your name on this Fantasy Ruckers Championship jersey behind me. JP Duplessis. Coming at number 2 is Dan Creel, which is an interesting name that we're definitely going to get into. Billy Meeks, we talked about him at the start of the show with our roster reveal, him returning to the Hounds. He was a top center in the 2023 fantasy season. Mika Kruse, which is he was a hybrid guy making appearances at that center position and back 3 position, makes it in at that 4th spot. And then Jordan Jackson Hope at that number 5 spot. Initial reaction to this top 5 ranking, Matt, before we start breaking each player down.
I mean, I think when you look at the season, I think it makes sense. Definitely makes sense. JP Duplessis at 1 is a lock. Billy Meeks, for me, I think the fact that he missed 4 games and still ended up in the top 3 is just wild. And then you look at kind of Mike Kruse, for he was on the back of a Utah Warriors lethal offense that we did not expect coming into the year. And we'll talk more of this as we get into our predictions. And then, I mean, the fact that Nola Gold, and we talked about this just earlier, how Bryce Campbell wasn't really able to put up the type of fantasy numbers, being as Billy Meeks was really eating up those yards. You look at Jordan Jackson Hope. I mean, that's 2 Nola Gold centers sitting in the top 5, and they still found a way to suck. So that's just impressive on their end.
Absolutely. All right. Well, let's talk about one of those Nola Gold centers to start off with, JP Duplessis. I think when you look at this top 5, you kind of break it down into 3 tiers. You got 2 top guys in that top tier here with JP Duplessis and Dan Creel. You got kind of that middling around Billy Meeks. And I don't even know if it's fair to put Mika Kruse in there because a large bulk of his point scoring came in through when he was playing at that back 3 position, which is going to have that tendency to have those high scoring point games. So there's a caveat there with Mika Kruse. And then you have that second tier with Jordan Jackson Hope. But JP Duplessis in that top tier, I mean, what a season he had. I mean, you're talking about just explosive games. That stretch that he had between round 10 and round 12 were 27.1 fantasy points, 22.4, 25.7, over 1,000 meters gained on the season, 129 tackles, 7 tries in the 14 matches that he started in and played in. 15 breakdown steals. He was a guy that was really good. And I think that was something that was special about JP Duplessis, was that he had all the categories that you expect from a high tier, high level center. And then you add things like the little things, like the try scoring, like the breakdown steals, and minimizing some of those turnovers. It just adds for the best point scoring player from that center position and that 4th best player as a fantasy whole on the year.
Yeah, I mean, his ability to work in the breakdown was something special to watch. I swear there are multiple times where you'd watch him steal in the breakdown and the next play be the guy that's scoring the try on the other end. He was a guy that just meter eater and was an absolute threat at the breakdown. And we've seen that at the at the back row position, for example, where guys who are a threat at the breakdown are guys that could put up big points. And the fact that he's putting over 1,000 meters gain on top of that and the try scoring ability, it just shows why he's, one of the top point scorers, not just centers, but point scorers in the MLR.
Yeah, and I'll give you credit, Matt. You drafted him with that first pick in your
Oh,
fantasy draft.
oof.
He goes in the 10th pick in the first round. Obviously expectations of him, and you'll see that in our predictions. Expectations of him having this type of season were there, but he really proved it this past season. And then moving on to Dan Creel, the difference, which is kind of crazy to me looking at the numbers, is that Dan Creel was almost like your prototypical center, right? Like
Yeah.
he was able to get that 200 point mark, and it's not like he did anything outside of his responsibilities from the center position. I mean, 135 tackles, over 1,100 meters gained, 4 tries. He was able to basically get as many fantasy points as JP Duplessis without the breakdown steals. And you talk about consistency. This is a guy that was consistent. I mean, basically every single match you were expecting a double-digit performance from Dan Creel. He only had 3 matches where he didn't touch that baseline. He maybe not have had as many explosive games as JP Duplessis because he didn't have that breakdown steal ability. He didn't have as many tries scored on the season, but I mean, this was a guy that was averaging 10 to 15 fantasy points on a weekly basis and still had the ability. I mean, it's not like he didn't score tries. He had that 2 try scoring match in round 11 where he got 28.5 fantasy points. It just wasn't that something you're seeing quite often. But I mean, if you're talking about a consistent guy that you can rely on week in and week out to get you points, Dan Creel was that guy.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the nail, right? It's consistency right there. And JP Duplessis had the bigger upside. He had those bigger games, but JP Duplessis also had a couple of those stinkers. There were a few of them. That's why he was a top center, but there were a couple there enough to kind of keep it close with Dan Creel, and Dan Creel to be able to just drive off that consistency. I think he probably also benefited off of being on a pretty good Seattle Seawolves squad that had a pretty good offense. So yeah, I mean, you hit it right on the nail, Ryan. There's not much else to say.
Yeah. And then this is where we start then going into kind of that second tier again. Dan Creel and JP Duplessis at the top of the list. And Dan Creel was drafted. It was a pretty big steal. I mean, drafted in the late 3rd round. I mean, if you're expecting that type of production, this is a guy that's going to go in your first round, no question. Dan Creel is going to be up there. It'll be interesting to see where he goes in 2024. But going into that second tier now of center players, and let me mention, Dan Creel was also not only the second best center player, he was the 5th best in all of fantasy as well at that center position. He was the only those were the only 2 centers in the top 10 when it came to total fantasy production. So again, without kind of that necessarily explosive, because we saw a lot of back 3 players in there and a lot of fly halves in there with the kicking ability. Those were 2 that were up there in that mix. But yeah, Billy Meeks to start off this kind of tier 2 type season. He was pretty solid too. Rounds out the year with 182.9 fantasy points. Doesn't start playing until round 4. Starts to make appearances, and then we start to see that kind of same consistency that you kind of saw with Dan Creel. I mean, 1,100 meters gained, only 1 try on the season, 140 tackles, had a little bit more breakdown action with 8 breakdown steals. But again, from round 7 through round 17, double-digit scoring. 15.6, 14.9, 22.7, 11.1. Like once he started getting things rolling, this was a guy that was producing consistently for you on a crappy Chicago Hounds team, right? So, I mean, the potential there, and it'll be interesting to see how we value this guy into the 2024 year, knowing that he's going to play a full year. Maybe thinking that the Chicago Hounds team improves a little bit with the whole, Jackie Moon situation. We'll see with that. But I mean, Billy Meeks, man, I mean, 182.9, I would consider him, if I was to extrapolate the data, in that tier 1 kind of conversation.
You're good at math. I mean, look, if he plays a full season, he's the top center in the league, fantasy points wise. I mean, like you said, extrapolate the data, right? 10 points per game for first 3 games. He's up there at 213 points. So that to me, I think just says everything you need to know about Billy Meeks. That if he played a full season, he would have been one of the tier 1 guys, and he should be one of the tier 1 guys. But let's look at the season as it was as what happened. It is what it is. He was the same Billy Meeks that we saw throughout those years, regardless of how much his team sucked. He was the same Billy Meeks. Meters gain, tackles. And he didn't need the tries to give you the consistency. Similar to Dan Creel, he had the meters gained and the tackles for you right there every game. He was there to play, sometimes getting double-digit tackles almost every game, in most games, really. And he was just consistent for you. And that's the type of center that some fantasy managers would want, because at the end of the day, that stacks up to be a consistent double-digit points, and you're going to get double-digit points from that position. And that leads to him being, the third in this tier 2 that we're calling it, the third best center. But I think really he's a tier 1 center and up there among with Dan Creel and JP Duplessis.
And talking out right now, honestly, to me, I think I'd prefer to have, and we're obviously going to get more into this conversation as the season goes on and we get closer to the draft. But honestly, at the center position, I would rather have a consistent person like Dan Creel and Billy Meeks. Just knowing the volatility of other back positions of the back three and having there, and just knowing that might be a better pathway to go in terms of building your team around. Again, you had the recipe to success this past year, and that
there's a champion that would say otherwise.
Hey, if you're gonna go all in it, you want to get those high ceiling games and you want to score those points, you're gonna get that done. But it's just an interesting kind of conversation to have, because again, JP Duplessis could get you as high as 30 points. You know what I mean? And this past year, and not that they can't, Dan Creel wasn't going to get you anything higher than 20 points necessarily, regular, but that could be the difference.
Let's also say this, is that when you're picking up a center, and really any position, this can apply to every position, but let's say the center is just because the center, I think meters gain relies so heavily on how well the offense is moving and what kind of front football you're getting. You're really betting on, for JP Duplessis, not only him, but also what is Nola Gold doing, right? Like we saw that Nola Gold's success also coincided with JP Duplessis' success, right? Yes, Nola Gold lost some games where JP Duplessis was great, but we saw the big explosive games from JP Duplessis when Nola Gold was on that little bit of a winning streak that they had in the middle of the season. So I think, yes, you love the consistency, but if Nola Gold, right, if you think Nola Gold is going to be a team next year, then you hop back on that JP Duplessis train, because you know that their success and his success, they rely on each other. They're a match made in heaven.
Remember that time when
I picked them to win? I know. I remember that time too, and they ended up stinking. Okay, at least I didn't pick the Hounds.
We'll see. Yeah, Jeff, fair enough. We'll see how you double down here, maybe into the next year. But coming at the 4 position, Mika Kruse
kind of cheated.
It kind of, yeah, sure. If you want to put it that way. I mean, again, but you can't take away from the fact that he did have center eligibility. I mean, he earned that center eligibility about halfway through the season, and it's not like he didn't perform at the center position. I mean, he had rounds 9 and round 10, 20.7, 13.5 there. But again, it's interesting, because I think this bakes in another element of how you approach certain positions. Like you have Mika Kruse, right, who's your traditional back three player, plays center here for the Warriors here in and here out, gains that eligibility. Is he a guy that you're comfortable slotting at your center position, knowing that you're going against guys that have a Dan Creel, that have a JP Duplessis, that have a Billy Meeks in their lineup, who are more consistent? But then again, he has games where he can pop off here, and he's shown it. I mean, he went through a stretch between round 2 and round 7 that included a center start there where he got 20.4 points. This is a solid player, man, and he was able to do it at both positions. There's some value to be had there to have a guy that can play both the back three and the center position.
Yeah, for sure. You definitely have seen, like, for example, the back row, second row position. We talked about that, how there's value in that, but I think the issue here is that when you get some of the back three center kind of mix, you start to get into that back three volatility.
Right, exactly.
And you get into that back three, and we see this with Mika Kruse's season, right? Like, he has some really great moments and some really high ceilings and some really low floors, and where you're sitting there like, dang, I just got 5 points for my center position, or dang, I got 5 points for my back three position. And that's the reason why he's in this tier 3 section, and he's not up there with the others. So I think that's what you can expect from him. And honestly, every other kind of player that's after the top 3 guys.
Sure. And then talking about shifting on to this next guy to round out the top 5, the other NOLA Gold center, Jordan Jackson Hope, which again is surprising to see another center there. But again, to your point, Matt, I think as we go down the list, I think what we're getting familiar with this center position is that volatility is not really the name of the game here, right? It's just this baseline that you have. And as you get to kind of lower tier centers, that baseline just lowers and lowers a little bit. Here, Jordan Jackson Hope, he's consistent. You look at his numbers. I mean, between rounds 2 and round 6, double-digit fantasy points, but that double-digit fantasy point performance is a little bit lower. You were seeing with Dan Creel and with Billy Meeks, that kind of baseline was around the 15-point mark. Here, you're seeing it more around the 12, 11 point mark. So still consistent for you, just that consistent production wasn't as high as these other guys, and that's why he's in the kind of that tier 3 space. But nonetheless, you were happy with Jordan Jackson Hope. I mean, he had the ability to go off 22 points in round 12, 16.8 points in round 3. It was there. Maybe not a top guy, but happy with him.
Yeah, definitely happy. I think, he dealt with some injuries, so that kept him out of, I think, like 3 or 4 games. But, you look at the centers, the other thing, the fact that he's consistent, great. But the other thing is that, like you said, right, that consistency bar of what you expect week in, week out is maybe not 10, but maybe that moves down to 8 points a week, right? And that's simply just due to the fact that he's a bit more one-dimensional than the other guys, right? Like, from him, you really love to see those meters gain. That's where he thrived. That's where he got all the points that he got. And you were happy if you got another stat wise that hit that high, like, for example, tackles getting to the double digits, and you're happy with that. You'd be really happy with that. But it wasn't consistently doing things in 2 different categories every game in, game out. And that's what kind of results in that lower bar consistency. And that's what you can kind of expect from these centers as we move lower and lower in the tiers. And as the points get lower, they get less and less high performing in one category or multiple categories.
I mean, you're pretty happy too. I mean, Jordan Jackson Hope was a guy that was undrafted, right? In our fantasy league. So, I mean, you were happy with getting a guy that was start every week type level when 100%. It came to the center position. If you're picking him off the waiver wire. So definitely not the same draft capital as those high guys.
And he was a big part of that NOLA offense. Like, both him and JP Duplessis were major parts of that NOLA offense. And they were always getting the ball. They always had a chance to go off and always have a chance to kind of break the gain line and get meters gain. So he was kind of, when he went undrafted in that first week, he was definitely a big guy in the waivers because everybody saw just the impact that he could have on that NOLA offense.
Absolutely. All right. Well, your favorite part of the episode, Matt, let's start getting into comparing the top 5 that was in this 2023 year.
It looks so bad
to the predictions into the 2023 season. Hey, I'd like to say we didn't do necessarily terrible. I mean, you look at the list here, Maddie, your numbers here. You got number 1, Billy Meeks, number 2, JP Duplessis, number 3, Will Leonard, number 4, Lewis Vanderskiff, and number 5, Tay Walden. On my end, I had 1 at Billy Meeks. We both had the consensus there, and I think we can agree that we'd probably put this guy up there every if we had to do the list again. JP Duplessis for me at 2, Tay Walden at 3, Laruma Len at 4, which I'm going to talk about here because I think that I have a way to back myself up with that pick, and then Lewis Vanderskiff to round out the 5. I mean, again, I think there was no one terribly off like some of our other rankings that we had. Again, I think as the season unfolded, we kind of learned a little bit more. I think the one glaring one is Lewis Vanderskiff that probably we had a lot of confidence. I think my Houston SaberCats confidence kind of bled into you a little bit in this top 5. But nonetheless, I mean, Billy Meeks had on that 1. We'll start off there, and he finishes off as the center 3. I mean, I think, again, if we had to do this list again, we'd put Billy Meeks at 1.
Yes, disclaimer, we did this list before we found out about his visa issues. We found out about the visa issues a minute before the draft, I'm pretty sure. And this was done way before the draft. So can't blame us there. I think if he plays a full season, he's number 1. JP Duplessis is 2. We have those on lock, right?
Yeah.
I think we have those on lock if Billy Meeks, if USA was just like, come on in and play week 1. But isn't what happened.
Well, let's get into then number 3, Matt. You had number 3, Will Leonard, who finished it off as the center 8. I had Tay Walden, who finished off as the 9th best center. Take me through kind of what happened with Will Leonard there.
Well, it was hard. Will Leonard, with the season that he had last year, it was just hard to not have him in the lineup. And frankly, what happened was essentially was that he just didn't play as big of a role in that Utah lineup, in that Utah offense, as some of the other guys, right? You saw the likes of Mike Cruze, you saw the likes of top point scorer. Give me the name. Top point
Joe
scorer for
Mono?
Utah. Joe Mono. You saw the likes of these guys. I mean, even like you saw the likes of these guys kind of come in and take the spotlight away from him. And I think that's what really affected him the most. He's not that far off though. He ends off of what? Center 8?
It's 8, yep.
And frankly, he's not that far off of Jordan Jackson Hope.
Yeah.
So I'm happy. I think with the data that we had, I would have made that same choice again.
Yeah.
I think going into next year, I don't see him as kind of coming back into that top 3 center role.
We don't even know if he's on Rugby.
Well, we don't know. We also see that's another thing, but yeah. So nobody will be picking him potentially, but if he's back, I think this is kind of where he sits.
And the Will Leonards.
Yes,
Okay.
Exactly. This is where he will sit. This is where he lives in this tier of centers.
All right. Well, number 3, I had Tay Walden, and you had Tay Walden at your number 5 position. But I think the same sentiment was there for us when we had this kind of lineup. Again, just the pedigree was there. We thought he was going to do big things. I think kind of what you alluded to earlier in the breakdown is that the performance of the team coincides so much with the player. And the New York Ironworkers were disappointing this past year. They just were not as good and explosive as we thought they were going to be. And Tay Walden, with the expectation he had, close. You weren't necessarily disappointed, right?
Yeah.
He just had, I think what had happened in there, he was consistent. But then when he wasn't consistent, that's when it really hurts you. Like when he didn't go there, he had the games where he only put up 4 points, 5.5 points, 7.9. Like there were games where he fell off the map, and that's where when he wasn't there for you, and he wasn't.
For me, it was just the fact that he didn't get as much playing time as the rest of the guys, and whether that contributes to the fact that I think he came off the bench a couple games. They had Fauci Fuatai, they had Emery there. Every time I say Emery, I want to say Ray Emery, but this isn't hockey. For those of you who know, you know. But I mean, it was tough. I think the biggest thing, Ryan, you brought it up, is that the Ironworkers or Rugby, whatever, New York, just didn't end up having the season that we thought they're going to have. And they were frankly led to believe
who we thought they were.
Yeah, they weren't. And we were led to believe that by our friend of the show, Andrew Coe, comes on and tells us, what a great preseason they're having. So I don't want to blame it on him, but he kind of messes up here. Just a little bit, but yeah. But like the last thing I'll say is that he was center 9. Okay. Like the fact that he didn't really play all season, where, by the way, Will Leonard started every game and he's still ending up center 9. I think you can be, happy with that. And it makes me feel better about making that pick, at least at number 5 for you. I don't know if it helps at number 6.
This is a therapy session, man. We're just talking things through, but this is maybe where you get a little bit sad because you got Lourdes Vanderskip at number 4. I had him at number 5. This one was a disappointing one. Obviously the big one here is injury. It took him a little bit to get going here at the start of the season. It took him a little bit to get going after he came back from injury.
Yeah.
But he showed spurts of that ability. He was on the field for the full 80 minutes when he was on the field. He had such a try-scoring ability in that previous 2022 year that was just hard to not put him here.
Yeah.
But I think the injury played the big part here. Finishes off as the center 22. Disappointed with Lourdes Vanderskip, mainly based on availability.
That's an understatement. But yes, unfortunately, this year was the year of Dom Aquino. Dom Aquino was the guy. Christian Dyer, yes, he played center, but we liked him on the wing. Dom Aquino was the center for the Houston SaberCats. He was the staple for the Houston SaberCats, and he just got outplayed by Dom Aquino. And when he was out, Dom Aquino took that opportunity and said, look, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to score tries. I'm going to make meters gain. I'm going to make tackles. And he did what he did. And that's why Dom Aquino ended up being center 6 and Lourdes Vanderskip ended up being center 22. So yes, disappointing, but we will learn from this, Ryan, and we will not make this mistake again. This is the issue. And what happens when we try to extrapolate from his 7 games last year, scoring a try a game. And we should just remember that, hey, there's a reason why he only played 7 games, and maybe we should think about that when we're picking our rankings.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right, and then at the 4 position for me, and I'm going to protect this one. I'm going to die on a hill on this one because
I will protect you too.
I picked Leroux Milan at the number 4 position. He finishes off at the center 24. Now, mind you, he started off the year on injury, does not make an appearance until round 8. And yet he's still able to finish off at the center 24 position. And I'll rack off the point listings that he had here. You got 13 and 8, 22.6 and 9, 14.6 and 10, 7.1 and 11, 18.4 and 13, 11.2 and 14, 6.9 and 15, 15.1 and 16. So within that 8-match stretch, only 2 performances where he got anything below the double-digit mark, always higher than 6.9, had the ability to score up to 20 points, did it right off the get-go. If this guy played a full season, he might be up there in that tier 1 category.
Hey, remember what I just said about extrapolating?
That's fair.
Put it in the trash because we're extrapolating with Leroux Milan. If this guy plays a full season, this guy scores over 200 points, and he's sitting in our tier 1 of centers. I mean,
yeah,
it's a shame the fact that he got hurt in the World Cup is bad that he did. Yeah. And we hope to see him back, and we hope to see him have a swift recovery because this guy is one of the top centers in the MLR. And it is if he plays a full season, extrapolate again. If he plays a full season, he's in that top tier, and we're looking at a top tier of centers of Billy Meeks, JP Duplessis, Dan Creel, Leroux Milan, and that's how it should be. Yeah. And that should be the future of the MLR in that center position.
I don't think Lourdes Vanderskiff likes the double standard that we're putting.
Look, I'm sorry, but Leroux Milan outplayed you in 8 games.
He's the exception.
Yeah, he outplayed you in 8 games. Look, if I took 8 games of your games, Lourdes Vanderskiff, I'm sorry, but you don't match up to him.
Yeah. So, anyways, but there's your predictions there. Again,
we still suck, Ryan.
No, I think we did okay.
Ryan, look, we're not good. And the back three position is if I remember my predictions correctly, it's not going to go well either. I mean, look, the top guy in the back 3 is on none of our back 3 lists, Ryan. None of ours.
He went undrafted.
The second top guy. The second top guy is on neither of our back 3 lists.
Yeah.
Neither of ours. He's on our. Actually, we predicted so poorly that he's on our scrum half list. That's what happened. I don't want to spoil it, but just remember that's what happened. That's how badly we predicted this season.
That's a bad thing though, because he ended up winning you a championship, and obviously, we're talking about
back of the year Nate Oxberger.
Nate Oxberger, yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, again, I think this just shows us that maybe you're a half glass empty guy. I'm a half glass full. I mean, I think predicting 2 of the top 5 is not too bad. But anyways, we stay tied in this round. But in the grand scheme of the
sick record, Ryan. What's the record? Say it. Tell the people what we're tied at.
Well, all I know is that I'm winning. So
okay, sure, but tell them what we're at in this record.
I'm 1-0-5.
Sick. And what does the 5 represent, Ryan? What does the 5 represent?
It just means we tied. So does that mean we're both as bad?
Awesome. That's imagine if we had a league and it was 2 teams that were just tied with that record. Wouldn't it be so much fun to watch?
Yeah, lots of fun. It could just mean that we're equally good at making these top 5 picks.
All right. Go back and tell me if that's true.
All right, maybe that's time to wrap up the episode. Anyways, well, here, our ranking reveal continues. Top 5 there on the board for our center position and marquee position.
I'm so happy the next one's the last one, Ryan. It's like we're coming off of this is what's happened. We get into the excitement of the signings, then we get into this absolute crapshoot that we had.
Yeah.
It was like we threw darts at the wall, picked our top 5.
We can promise the people that 2024 will be better, right?
Well,
hopefully.
Look, if this rankings, and we'll get into this next episode, but if this ranking has taught me anything, is that the MLR, what makes fantasy MLR, we're going to finish the episode on this, right? What makes fantasy MLR so crazy and unlike any other sport or fantasy sport is that, yeah, there's volatility in fantasy. There's always volatility, but the surprises you get from Fantasy MLR. You don't even know the guys that are in the top 5 once they get in. You don't even know they're part of the team. Have you ever seen a visa issue? Have you ever seen a visa issue affect your fantasy season? No, but in the MLR, yeah, you saw that. So have you ever seen a guy who you thought was at this position, but ended up being in a completely other position and dominates that position? No, but guess where you have seen it? Fantasy MLR. If you have any reason to want to do Fantasy MLR, it is the suspense, the edge of the seat excitement that you have just trying to figure out whether the players that you picked are actually going to play that weekend. Just, you're going to love it. That's all I have to say.
It's true, and I think that's a perfect way to end the episode. Well, hey, back three's coming up next episode. Gonna be exciting again. We're gonna keep you updated with all the latest off-season stuff, and again, we're continuing to do the work here at the Fantasy Ruckers Show to get Fantasy MLR to the masses. We've seen the website, and it's a good one, and hopefully we'll be able to bring this pain to all of you out there, and we'll see whether or not you can enjoy the volatility and the unknown that is the Fantasy MLR. Well, hey, for Matt Yee, for Devin Vandy Vanderpool, I'm Ryan Yee, and we'll be back next week here on the Fantasy Ruckers Show.
Vandy, come back.
You've been listening to the Fantasy Ruckers Show, bringing fantasy rugby to the masses, covering everything rugby from the MLR and beyond. We hope you enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and be sure to tell all your friends. We'll be back soon, but in the meantime, connect with us on social media at the Fantasy Ruckers. Till next time, this is the Fantasy Ruckers Show, signing off.